There is general agreement in education that being data-informed is essential. Indeed, in a recent survey of 44,000 teachers, 95% agreed that data is important. Being data-informed and not data-driven helps you to know every learner well, enabling every learner to achieve. Let's hear a perspective on the use of assessment data in international schools from Matthew Savage.
Since joining the international sector 6 years ago, I've noticed a real growth within international schools. When I first came out internationally in 2010, schools didn't really use data. Schools where there was advanced use of data were few and far between. And what I've noticed over the last 6 years are a number of things changing. There's become a real hunger for quality data and for quality use of that data. And schools are becoming incredibly voracious in their appetite for really effective assessment tools. And I'm noticing now that you find increasingly the best international schools have some of the best and most cutting-edge assessment practice from around the world.
So what does good assessment practice look like? How could the data be used to help your students and schools thrive? Let's hear from Russell Hobby about the importance of data and its place in school.
Data absolutely has a place in school because it starts the conversation off, and the beauty of data is its objectivity. It's not necessarily its accuracy or its relevance, but the fact it's hard to argue with that, whereas when we're just forming qualitative judgments, it is all too easy to fool ourselves that something's going well. But if you can start with some hard numbers and look at how they're changing over time, at the very least you have that prompt. The important thing is that you just don't leave it there and that you go and dig on behind them to find out what's really happening.
What should you assess? When is a good time to assess? Let's explore these a little further, and to do this we will look at working through a suggested assessment timeline. Here we can see an exemplar assessment regime with a range of suggested assessments across an academic year. This timeline begins in September. However, it is the point in the academic year which is most important here and not the month. However, many schools will start with a placement test prior to their students being admitted to school. Louise Simpson's school used CAT4 as part of their selection process. Here she describes how the feedback is used effectively.
So I think the most useful thing is for the disappointed parents. I have a lot of disappointed parents when we run entry assessments because their children are not able to win one of the very few places that are available in our school. And since I've sat down with those parents and talked them through the report and given them guidance on what they can do, areas to develop their child, things that came up in the tests that were particularly concerning, we've had some very happy parents who've gone away, have been very unhappy when they first came to me, sat and listened, felt very assured that we can have that conversation with them. Then they've gone away and they've worked with their child on that particular area, and they've come back a year later, been assessed, and the child has made massive progress and has really developed the skills that were lacking and has been entered into the school. So I think that the personal feedback that has to be done on a one-to-one, as a head you have to sit down with the parent and spend that time. It's created great relationships with parents. It's created, I think, a better reputation for the school as a school that cares and wants to give some feedback to parents.
Let's look at the timeline again and start at the beginning of your academic year. To start with, we would recommend a certain year group takes CAT4 each year. This should be determined by your school's need. As an example, you might assess using CAT4 with the year groups 4, 7, 9 and 11. Or if your groupings are called grades, grades 3, 6, 8 and 11. Here is Philip Walters discussing which year groups in his school take CAT4 and how the data is used to inform teaching and learning.
We assess all our students at various times. We take the students at year 4, year 7 and year 10 to do CAT4 testing. And we do that so that we've got accurate and up-to-the-date data. And students who join in between, so if we have a new starter in year 8, yes, they do the CAT4 testing as well. With that data, we track the student achievement. So if we're grading our report grades, for example, we compare to the overall SAS. So it's a pretty rough measure, but it allows us to try to track any potential underachievement and celebrate success of children who may have a relatively low CAT score, but for example, a B grade or B grade average might be a real success and something to celebrate. So it allows us to pick on them, to celebrate those children, but also, if our staff get used to using overall mean SAS, obviously you're also tracking everybody, but the highest scorers, if they're then getting only average grades, our system will just colour code them and pick them out.
So we would now have some high quality data supporting our view on what our students' potential might be. For very young children, CAT 4 Digital begins at Year 3. Next, we would recommend screening of all of your pupils to see if there are any barriers to their learning, aspects that might undermine or hinder good progress. To do this, we suggest the Pupil Attitude to Self and School, PASS. Here, Lisa Crawlesby discusses how using the PASS survey can provide powerful insights.
For us, data and assessment is about looking at the whole child. And often when you're looking at personal and academic interventions, you will get a greater impact. The Pupil Attitudinal Survey has been incredibly powerful for us to actually see if there are more barriers to pupils' learning other than academic ones. And for us to be able to home in and actually determine what some of those issues may be allows for a more pastoral and academic approach. And that's when we talk about performance and pupil potential from a whole pupil perspective. So for us, taking that view and looking at how a child perceives their education, and if it is negative, what can we do about that? What sort of interventions can we employ to help that pupil have stronger attitudes to their learning and to their education? And we know then we'll get the win-win on the academic side too.
So you can see it is important to get this attitudinal view. This will enable you to address any issues and provide support for your students early. Many schools will assess with PASS at this time, as it is a relatively quiet time of year, yet early enough, giving you the opportunity to intervene as appropriate. As we move through the academic year, we'd recommend screening for literacy and reading comprehension. Once again, providing you with valuable data to help understand if reading is a barrier to learning. Here our suggestion is towards the end of the first full term, and as with our other suggestions, it is important that you consider what is best for your school. Here Jonathan Bishop discusses how looking at specific factors identified within the data helps him focus the resources at his school more effectively.
I think data is really important at all levels. So I think at a strategic level, often it is around ensuring that you're providing the right level of resource, whether that's human resource or whether it is resources to facilitate the curriculum, to the places where it really matters. And so often we can have a sort of broad brush approach. I think the challenge of rich assessment data is analysing it in a way where you can start to set your priorities as a school. So, we'd be very good at saying, look, our reading data is really poor in a school, we need a big reading initiative, and that's quite a broad brush approach. But where you can start to look at maybe certain year groups where overall they have got very specific needs, or a year group where maybe the teachers are less experienced, need more support, what you can start to do is target the resources really accurately to give the teachers and the children the best chance of succeeding that year.
At some point in the year, you will want to gain a view of your school from your stakeholders, parents, pupils and your staff by using the Kirkland Rowell survey. Here Lucy Moonen discusses why her school values the Kirkland Rowell surveys.
So stakeholder surveys are important because they do provide a lot of really in-depth and also impartially produced analysis, and that's a very good starting point for us to have conversations about aspects of the school. I suppose if we made our own surveys, we would probably prejudge the areas of the school we'd need to look at. We might not have the analytical tools that we needed. So quite often they do throw up new things or things that we weren't necessarily expecting. And we're also able to do them on a really wide scale that would be quite difficult if we were trying to do them in-house.
In our timeline, we suggest during the second term, as the academic year is well bedded in, and your stakeholders are becoming better informed about your school. You may choose a different time of year that better suits your school's calendar. It is, however, important to survey at the same time each subsequent year so that the data is like for like, and also that each stakeholder group is surveyed at the same time. As you move towards the end of the academic year, you will want to see what academic progress your students have made. This is typically where attainment tests, such as the progress tests in English, Maths and Science, are taken. This will then give you a view of attainment levels this year, together with a view on progress made since the previous year. The progress tests will provide you with a standard age score. At this point, you will also have assessed your students across a range of assessments, and this now enables you to compare your students' ability with their attainment. Are there any underachievers? Who are they? And what are the next steps to support them? Here Daisy Christodoulou discusses the importance of standard age scores year on year.
So I think the standardised data that's most interesting for us to compare over time is really the standard score. Is interesting to track changes of that over time. Now, of course, you have the issue that with every standard score, it's got a confidence interval. Once you start comparing more than one of them, you then have more than one confidence interval that you've got to factor in. So you have to be careful when you do that. It's not always straightforward, but I think that can be very powerful. The other thing I think that's very powerful when you do that is to start to look maybe less at the individual, because the individual those confidence intervals can be really significant, and to start to look at cohort averages, because you would hope that in a large cohort, the average of the standard score, some of those confidence interval issues become less significant because you've got hundreds of pupils. So if you're comparing the average of a cohort over time, some of the issues about confidence and unreliability start to wash out a little bit.
We've now had a look at an exemplar of an assessment calendar across the academic year. Finally, Jonathan Bishop discusses the assessment regime at his school and the thinking that underpins this.
Our assessment processes at school are developing and emerging with the challenges of life after levels. But in essence, what we're trying to do is get a raft of assessments that give us standardised scores that would enable us to really pinpoint the needs of the child, the progress of the child, and really identify any barriers to their learning, so we can use that rich assessment information to really inform teachers' planning.